Thank you for being here tonight, just giving people extra time to log in and logging everyone on Zoom as well. So we appreciate the crowd, another 25 people on Zoom, so we appreciate the interest. My name is Ted Langell, Mayor Headland's Chief of Staff, and leading this effort for the town and MWRA Water. We are here tonight as another public meeting, this one related to our recent filing with MWRA, our expanded environmental notification form, which was filed on May 31st, published on June 7th, which starts that public comment process as well. So tonight we have Alice Drisky from MWRA with us, and our consultant Ryan Algrove from Environmental Partners. So there'll be a presentation, some information given, and then a chance for folks to ask questions. So I'm going to let Alex say a few comments first, and then we'll get into the presentation.
Hi everyone, I'm Alex Drisky.
Could you just speak in, sorry, could you speak into the mic for the cable? Thanks.
I'm Alex Drisky from the MWRA office. Thanks everyone for coming. So I will just really briefly give a little bit of background about the MWRA process and in general, and what we hope to accomplish tonight, and then turn it over to the town's consultant for a presentation about the project. And I guess I first will just say that this is a very informal meeting. It's not a public hearing. I will not be, there are no minutes recorded. Actually, I have to stop and take care of one other thing first. So the MWRA office is implementing an environmental justice policy, and one of those requirements is for interpreters to be made available at meetings. So we have one here, and who I asked to come up and ask if anybody can use his services.
Hi， 大家好，我是你们的翻译，需要翻译可以找我。
Okay, great. Once again, it's an informal meeting. It's not a public hearing. There'll be time for questions from everybody. And I want to emphasize, though, that if you want to provide formal input into the process, you must submit comments in writing. I believe my email address is there. There's also a MWRA public comments portal. So with that, I'll give a little bit of background about MWRA. MWRA stands for Massachusetts Environmental Policy Act. It's administered by the Secretary of the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs. And a couple of things to emphasize about the MWRA process. First of all, it's not a permitting process. We don't approve or deny projects. It's sort of a pre-permitting process that serves to disclose, help the public understand projects, disclose the environmental impacts of a project, identify mitigation, ways for minimizing impacts of a project. But, the result of our, review is to basically make a certification that, yes, you've adequately documented your project and the alternatives and all the impacts and all the mitigation measures. Now you're ready to go on to the permitting process. And, getting through MWRA doesn't necessarily mean a permit will be granted. It just means that we've made a determination that the project's adequately been described. So that's the first thing. It's not a permitting process. Secondly, as I sort of mentioned, the purpose of MWRA is for generally larger projects that we review, provide the public an opportunity to learn about a project, provide input sort of before the permitting stage. Secondly, to ensure that all environmental impacts of a project are identified, and that alternatives are considered, and that any mitigation or ways of minimizing impacts are implemented. So in this case, this project requires MWRA review because it needs several state permits, particularly from the Water Resources Commission related to the potential transfer of water from the MWRA system to the town. And then also permits from DEP and other state agencies depending on the route of the pipeline. And the MEPA process, so the environmental notification form has been filed. That's the first step in our process. Typically, there's a 3-stage review process in MEPA. First, the ENF, environmental notification form, and then that would be followed by a draft environmental impact report, and then a final environmental impact report. However, we have a pathway where a proponent, in this case the town, can choose to sort of provide a lot of information in the first stage. So they provide an expanded environmental notification form and then request that they only have to prepare one environmental impact report after this. So it would be this document and then an single environmental impact report. So that's one decision the secretary will make whether to grant that request. So let's see, the comment period is right now scheduled to end the 8th of July. I think we may extend that a little bit. We'll have to talk to the town, but I think if you've signed in, I'll send an email to everyone who signed in, who left their email address to notify you if there is a comment period extension. But for now, it's scheduled to the end on the 8th. So when the comment period ends on July 8th, we will consider all the comments. We'll write draft a certificate that sort of reviews the project, reviews the comments we've received from the public and from agencies, identifies the impacts associated with the project, and then for the most part identifies what more information is needed to be provided in the environmental impact report. So it's really a scoping document to a large extent. In this case, there will also be a decision made on whether there be a draft and a final EIR or just a single EIR. And that decision by statute has to be issued 1 week later. So right now it's scheduled for the 15th. And again, it's not approval, it's just notifying the town of what needs to be provided in the EIR. Then when the EIR, let's say assuming there's a single EIR, for the sake of just illustrating this, the town would prepare the single EIR. It'd be available for public review and comment. And then another certificate would be issued to make a determination as to whether that EIR provided all the information and analyses that were requested in the scope for the EIR. And if it is, and if MEPA is satisfied, then at that point the town could proceed to the next permitting stage with either the MWRA or DP or whoever that is. So that's all I wanted to say for now. Are there any real quick questions about that, about the process? I think it would be good to get into the presentation. So, okay, thanks. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. My name's Ryan Allgrove. I'm with Environmental Partners, the town's consultant on this project. It's nice to see you all again. I've made this presentation a few times, and there is some repeat information for a lot of you on this, but there is also some new slides, some new information for people who have been coming to these meetings. So I want to start with the project why before we get into the details of what the proposed work is. And as with a lot of things, it starts with an issue of supply and demand. The town has a fixed amount of water that it can withdraw from its surface water sources, which is Great Pond and the South Cove of Whitman's Pond, and the groundwater sources, which are sort of around Whitman's Pond and the Mill River subbasin and the Old Swamp River subbasin. Right now, they're permitted, or they're allowed to withdraw 5 million gallons a day from those sources. If you stretch those sources to the absolute limit, 6.27 million gallons per day is what those sources could produce safely in a drought condition. But so that that's sort of the numbers of what the town has on supply. The reality is that the groundwater supply is aging. The wells are over 60, 70 years old in some cases. They need to be replaced eventually. The location of those wells is not ideal based on the aquifer protection 400-foot radius around them, because those wells were installed well before any of these, before Mass DEP existed, things like that. There are new and future treatment challenges. I'm sure you've all heard of PFAS, the forever chemical. The town, it meets all those regulatory requirements, but it comes at a cost. The filter media in all their water treatment plants needs to be changed out much more frequently now that that constituent has to be taken into account. So there's a cost that's, just within the last couple of years, the town, the DPW's had to deal with. And then probably the biggest issue is, all of Weymouth's water supplies are tributary to the Back River ACEC, the area of critical environmental concern. It's a very sensitive resource. I'm sure, as you all know, the herring run that comes up to Whitman's Pond for spawning. There's an inherent conflict between the water supply and that resource that's been going on, since the town had a drinking water supply. So that's the supply side, and then on the demand side, the town, outside of the South Weymouth Naval Air Station has a lot of development pressure, and if you add the Naval Air Station on top of that, you can see this graph here that, there's a potential for another 1.5 MGD, 1 million gallons per day of demand on an average day over what the town currently withdraws, which is, around 4.25 to 4.5 MGD, something like that. So this big blue line on the board there, that's sort of the potential where things could go up through the next 25 years or so. And you can see it blows past what they're allowed to withdraw, and it actually exceeds the safe yield that the system could produce under, safely under a drought condition. So that's really the genesis of where the project comes from. And a couple other things to note is that, this idea of bringing the MWRA to Weymouth has been around for a while. This isn't sort of a new idea in the last couple of years. It's been around for 10, 15, 20 years, I guess. But, the timing right now is probably better than it's ever been. I know Ted has said this many times that, the MWRA has waived their entrance fee, which represents a significant cost savings to the town, tens of millions of dollars. They have adequate supply to supply Weymouth. I think there's a slide in here, 50 million gallons or so that they've sort of allocated to new customers. And, Weymouth is looking to get 8.8 million gallons per day of that 51. There's a new development team at the base there in the middle of their MEPA process, which is sort of running in parallel with this project. And, that was done purposefully so that the public could sort of see both projects and how they relate to each other, so that, you can see the whole picture. That was really the idea. That's why they just filed their environmental impact report. We're in our notification form, and so that the public will get an idea of what their plans are and how it relates to this project and vice versa. And then lastly, that there is a federal and state focus on infrastructure funding throughout the country right now. So that's the why. What the project is, you can really divide into two pieces. There's the interbasin transfer to replace Weymouth supplies. So water from the MWRA comes from the Chicopee River Basin, the Quabbin Reservoir in central Massachusetts, and also the Wachusett Reservoir in the Nashua River Basin. So that would be transferred to Weymouth, which is in the Boston Harbor Basin, and also a small section of the Naval Air Station is in the South Coastal Basin. So it's a transfer from the Chicopee Basin and the Nashua River Basin to the Boston Harbor and South Coastal Basins. And that replacement would mean that Weymouth supplies would be phased out, immediately the groundwater supply, the proposed project would shut those off and abandon the water treatment plant. And the first phase of the surface water supply would be to eliminate the Washington Street pump station, which pumps from South Cove to Great Pond. So then it would just be Great Pond, proper. That would still be active. And the biggest reason for that is redundancy. We can't put the town's entire water supply in a single pipeline because at some point that pipeline will need to be taken offline for maintenance. And the Weymouth's neighbors don't have enough water to just, open up the valve and feed Weymouth on their own. So until a redundant supply is figured out, and that could mean, further expansion of the MWRA, or the Great Pond Water Treatment Plant could be put in sort of a standby mode. This is out in the future, and until that point, the Great Pond Water Treatment Plant would stay active. So that's the interbasin transfer piece. Second piece is, the physical infrastructure that's needed to get water from the end of the MWRA system in Quincy to Weymouth. And, there are several routes under consideration. They're all 4 to 5 miles in length. 6.2 to 7.8. Says it right there. So it's a long pipeline. I'll put up a map in a second. And there's a potential for up to 2 pump stations being needed just to get water pressure up to where it needs to be to service Weymouth. So this is the routes. We call them A1, A2, B1, and B2 because there's 2 connection points. One, the green line near the Pine Hill Cemetery off of Willard Street in Quincy, and that's the connection point B. And connection point A is the sort of pink purplish lines off of Furnace Brook Parkway in Quincy. So the pipeline route from Furnace Brook Parkway either takes you down Washington Street with a directional drill underneath the Fore River at the Fore River Bridge, and the sort of the dark pink line there, A2, sort of diverges from Route A1 and goes down Quincy Avenue to the landing, and then finds its way to the Essex Street water storage tank. Alternatively, the green lines, really they're B1 and B2, the 2 green lines are essentially the same. The only difference is that the dark green line, instead of putting a separate pump station in to raise the pressure of the water to meet Weymouth's hydraulic grade line, you would pipe the MWRA water to the Great Pond Water Treatment Plant and use the treatment plant as the pump station. So that's sort of similar pipe route. It's just at the end, how do you get the water pressure that you need? And you can see on here that the Arthur J. Bilodeau Water Treatment Plant, sort of in the center of Weymouth near Whitman's Pond, that's the groundwater treatment plant off of Winter Street, and that would be decommissioned, as soon as MWRA water starts flowing. There's almost 20 miles of pipeline on that map, so I didn't take a photo of every street, but I just wanted to hit some of the highlights in this presentation. You can see there Furnace Brook Parkway at Adams Street in Quincy. That's the location where routes A1 and A2 would connect to the MWRA system, so that general area. And then you can see the center picture there. That's approaching the Fore River Bridge from the Quincy side. And then similarly, on the right, you have the approach to Weymouth Landing from Braintree. So those are some of kind of the key locations for those 2 routes. And then there are water main improvements in Weymouth that go along with those routes. So these are sort of some typical streets in Weymouth that go along with routes A1 and A2. I picked Norton Street and Broad Street as representative. I think the roads in Weymouth are more residential than they are for the pipeline in Quincy and Braintree. With a pipeline like this, really, you're looking for roads that have a wider right-of-way, because really, you're going to need a lot of real estate for a utility corridor for a transmission main to go down. So smaller residential streets don't really work. With all the utilities that are in there, there just isn't enough space for another larger utility. So that's really why we choose the streets we chose in all these routes. This is B1 and B2, so Willard Street at the Pine Hill Cemetery, that's sort of the general location of where we would tie into the MWRA. I got Five Corners and Braintree, so obviously very heavily traveled, high traffic area that would, construction through an intersection like that is always going to create traffic issues. So these are some of the things we have to consider. If following along B1 and B2 down Grove Street towards the Weymouth line, and routes B1 and B2 also have some water main work on Main Street in Weymouth. So that's obviously another heavy traffic commercial area. I want to talk a little bit about some of the alternatives that were considered for this project. So there's always the do-nothing alternative, right? Which is status quo, and I think if that was a viable alternative, we wouldn't all be here. It doesn't meet any of the town's goals, for economic development or having a sustainable water supply that tackles the challenges of climate change. All the goals that the town has set out are obviously not met if we do nothing. We looked at increasing withdrawal from the sources the town has. Like I said, the projected demands actually exceed what the existing supplies could safely withdraw, so that throws that option out the window sort of from the get-go. But on top of that, the town recognizes and has proposed that the existing sources aren't viable at this point because of their age, because of the treatment challenges, because of the environmental impacts that they have, and that conflict that's been inherent since the water supply's been around. So that alternative was not considered any further. So you're sort of left at that point with, what are the options for additional supply? We looked in Weymouth at available land and aquifer to see if is there a location that the town could sink a new well or develop its own supply to meet the increased demand. And that site just doesn't exist. And the town went through that process back in the late 90s before this, obviously before this project, and the conclusion of that search for a new supply was to reactivate a well that had been shut off for 20 years. So, we sort of came up with the same conclusion that they came up with probably 30 years ago. We looked at interconnections. There are some of the neighboring towns that are in the Boston Harbor Basin, so it would, you could theoretically eliminate the interbasin transfer. But as you could read the paper even this week about issues that Hingham's having with their water supply. None of the neighbors on the South Shore, none of the towns on the South Shore really have the kind of excess capacity on the supply side that would be necessary to replace Weymouth's sources. We also considered the desalinization plant that is owned by Aquaria, and their customer is the city of Brockton. That, similar to the MWRA, would be an interbasin transfer, so that source is in the Taunton River Basin. So it doesn't, there's no advantage to going in that direction from an interbasin perspective. But we looked at it, and just real quick, the numbers, that the maximum capacity of that plant is 5 million gallons a day, average day, and that is less than the projected demand for the town. So in the end, it's not a viable alternative. Which leads us to our preferred alternative, which is the MWRA supply. They are the supply that has the water. 100 million gallons a day in excess supply capacity, roughly half of that available for new customers. They have 7.5 MGD maximum day capacity right now that they could serve Weymouth with. And if they make some improvements in their system, that supply goes up to 15.6 MGD. So, 15.6 MGD is more than the town will ever need. So there are communities south of Weymouth that are interested in, hey, if the pipeline is built for 15.6 MGD, which is the plan, they could tap into to the MWRA water supply as well. So it really quickly sort of dominoed into more of a regional solution for a lot of people. Environmental considerations. So outside of the interbasin transfer, which is an environmental impact on its own, you're taking water from one basin and moving it, to the other, to the coast. There are impacts related to the pipeline itself. Now, the pipeline will generally be in the public right-of-way along paved, traveled roads, so the impacts are generally similar to any utility project that the town has going on at, all points in time. I did list some of the impacts here that we calculated, and there's a range there because it depends on which route you want to take. So, for example, there's a potential for 20,700 square feet of impacts to a designated port area, which is, if they choose the route that goes by the Four River Bridge, that's a port area, so that there would be impacts that, the coastal zone management folks would need to, consider. So it's sort of a regulatory hurdle that only Route A1 has. Same thing with land subject to coastal storm flowage. That route along the coast is the only route that's subject to impacts from a coastal storm. So, there is a potential for going through 3,200 square feet of roadway could be impacted by a storm. Now, the infrastructure itself is a buried pipeline, so there's not much we can do to mitigate that. I mean, it's buried infrastructure, so we are acknowledging that we're going through these zones, but I think mitigation-wise, the nature of the infrastructure itself sort of self-mitigates in most ways. These other impacts here: isolated land subject to flooding, bordering land subject to flooding, riverfront area. All the routes, they're, like I said, they're 6-7 miles long. You can't go in any direction without crossing streams or going through buffer zones or within 200 feet of a water body. So those impacts can be mitigated just like any utility project that is going on right now in the town of Weymouth. I have here endangered species habitats over by Pine Hill Cemetery. At that connection, there is an priority habitat that we would impact for 400 or 500 linear feet of pipeline. I believe it's 2 species of snake. So that's something we would have to go through the Natural Heritage Program to mitigate the impacts during construction. The pipeline, no matter which route we take, we're crossing a regulatory floodway. Again, it's a buried pipeline, so it's sort of, its nature has very little impact to a floodway. And the other sort of impact that this pipeline will have is dredging. So our plan is, if any major water body crossing like the Four River will do a horizontal directional drill. So we basically drill under the river, and technically that would be considered dredging. It's not dredging like you would sort of see typically, where you're hydraulically sucking the silt off the bottom of the water body and putting it somewhere else. We'd be displacing soil with a pipeline and disposing of the soil at a landfill or somewhere else that's appropriate. So technically it's dredging, but not dredging as you would typically think of it. Last thing, water quality. Obviously, changing the town's water source there's a potential to have issues with lead and copper, aesthetics, taste and odor, revised total coliform rule and disinfection byproducts rule. So all those issues will be permitted through the drinking water program at Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection, but we are acknowledging that those need to be mitigated. So here's some of the mitigation items that I sort of already mentioned: trenchless installation for water body crossings, erosion and sedimentation controls when we're in buffer zones of wetlands. If we do end up needing a pump station, that site and that building would be designed to stormwater standards. If we end up choosing the Route B1 or B2 that connects near the Pine Hill Cemetery in Quincy, then we would just have to coordinate the mitigation requirements with Natural Heritage. And on the water quality side, the approach on corrosion control strategy, which is probably the biggest concern that the drinking water program will have, in light of Flint, Michigan, is, we're not going to change the town's corrosion control strategy. We're not going to bring in a totally different water quality and monitor that. We're going to treat the MWRA water as it comes in so that it matches the corrosion control strategy that the town has had for the last 20, 30 years. So that is sort of the approach that we've talked to DEP with in a preliminary basis, and that's how we expect it to go. The biggest change in MWRA water, the biggest difference in MWRA water is that it has a different residual disinfectant. It's chloraminated, which is essentially chlorine and ammonia, versus the town, which is free chlorine. And so there can be aesthetic effects when those two disinfectants mix. And our approach to that problem will be, depending on the route, if we choose B1 or B2 and we connect near the Great Pond Water Treatment Plant, the plan is to change Weymouth's disinfectant to match MWRA's, so then there's no mixing issue, everything's the same. And then the other routes, A1, A2, we would essentially lop off or separate the MWRA zones from the town supplied zone so that the mixing is minimal. If we needed to pump up from the MWRA zone into the town zone, we would, but the mixing would be minimal, and typically there's no aesthetic issues in that scenario. There are a lot of towns in Massachusetts that mix MWRA water and local sources with absolutely no issue. So we're not breaking new ground no matter what we do. And we've shown this slide before. I just want to quickly touch on, I just talked about all the environmental impacts, but I think overall, I see this project as a benefit to the environment because of the elimination of the water supply from Whitman's Pond. So, our plan is to abandon the groundwater supplies that are in the Mill River and Old Swamp River subbasins, eliminate pumping from South Cove to Great Pond, and then eliminate Whitman's Pond as an emergency source. The MWRA replaces Whitman's Pond as that emergency source. So I think it's really, from a water supply and an environmental perspective, it's a win-win. That is the end of the presentation. Ted, how do you want to do the questions?
Yeah, you all set? We're good? So we're going to take questions. If you come up to the mic on the podium, I just ask, and you guys can line up if others have questions after the person speaking. And I would just ask, given the number of people here and on Zoom, if you have more than one question, if you could just ask your first question and then let other people ask questions before you get back up and ask your other questions. So if you just go to the mic, you can just introduce yourself and ask your question. Thanks.
Hi. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yep.
Valerie Russo. I live in Weymouth. Question for you. All of these routes affect other municipalities. It's to our benefit and really not to their benefit at all. I'm not really sure on their say-so on whether this goes forward. How does that all work? I mean, is it like, you got to do it? Or they can say, no, you can't do it? I mean, why would they want to do it? I mean, there's nothing in it for them.
Yeah, there will have to be an intermunicipal agreement between Weymouth and the pipeline host community in order.
Why would they say, I mean, I don't mean to be difficult, but why would they say yes? I mean, we basically have to do it if we're going to run out of water. But what would make them want to say yes?
I think towns respect other towns' needs. I think we've had those meetings already with them, and there's been no non-starters yet. It's been very productive meetings with them. But again, I think it's municipalities understand the needs of municipalities sometimes, and they might need us someday. And I think that's how the communities work together. We've hosted 6 or 8 different communities in the area who support this project because they may be in the same boat soon after us. So I think it's that gives us that atmosphere of cooperation. But we are definitely going to need to do things for them.
Well, they will have to say, I mean, it won't, it's not like something the state comes in and says, this is, you got to do.
No, part of our application to be successful needs to have these agreements as part of that application.
And that's why we can't know the routes ahead of time.
Well, that's what we're working on now, because we need to now that we know which ones, we're going through those impacts with the towns.
Right now, that's happening right now.
Yes, that's happening right now.
Okay, because I'm just listening to the news in the national news about water wars being more and more of an issue throughout the world, throughout the nation. So that's why I'm asking the devil's advocate question of,
I get it. Yep. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Allison Dossett, 56 Belmont Street in Weymouth. And I'm not sure if you can answer this, but, oh, sorry. How's that? All right, good. So I'm Allison Dossett, 56 Belmont Street in Weymouth. And my research has shown that towns cannot surrender viable water sources. And you touched upon that with the wells, which we get. Luckily, those will be offlined as part of this. And then you made further comments about Whitman's Pond being phased out first, and then Great Pond is sort of a wild card depending on what happens further down the line. The town council and town administration wordsmithed a measure to protect residents from a potentially unfulfillable promise. Basically, they drafted a measure requesting that the state basically set precedent by guaranteeing us that they will offline these water sources. Is there anything that you've seen from the state that assures us and guarantees us that those water sources are going to come offline if we move forward? Thanks.
I can tell you that measure doesn't have a guarantee in it. It was actually worded very carefully that if we move forward this process, we will petition the state for those things. And there are different criteria for allowing that. I don't know if Ryan wants to get it. It's not just, there's some economic variables that may apply to allowing us to abandon a water source. I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, there's 3, I guess, facets to viability from the Water Resource Commission's standpoint. It's technical viability, so is it so polluted that you can't even treat it? Economic viability, is it so expensive to treat this water and get it to your customers that it just doesn't make economic sense? And then environmental. And so we've taken the stance, and if you read through the submittal, that the groundwater sources are not economically viable or environmentally viable, and that the Great Pond surface water system is not environmentally viable. That's what you just said is exactly the way that we've proposed the project.
Thanks. Go ahead.
Scott Dowd, 133 Pierce Road, Weymouth. I'm also on the town's Conservation Commission. So regarding the continued use of Great Pond and the pumping station there, that wouldn't come offline until other conditions came into into B. Are they being pursued? Is it a goal to take Great Pond offline?
Yeah, it is. And if, the request on a volume basis, how much water we're asking for is complete replacement of all sources. Now, with the understanding that it can't happen right away because there has to be a system of redundancy in place for the town. So we can't just flip the switch and then you have a single pipeline that you're relying on for your entire water supply. That's bad engineering practice, I guess, but common sense wise, it wouldn't work once that pipeline has to come offline. So yeah, some redundancy has to come into play before Great Pond can be decommissioned. And that redundancy could be, which we state in our submittal, that it could be Great Pond itself, the water treatment plant is put into some sort of standby mode so that it's not typically pumping unless you need it. And, and what that would look like, those details would need to work out, but that is something that, a strategy that's been employed, water treatment plants and other places, so it's an option.
Okay, I do have follow-up questions, but I'll get back in line.
Thank you. Okay.
Okay. In that case, would Great Pond be kept as reservoir status? In other words, it's not a recreational resource because it's a drinking water resource. If we have the pumping station treatment plant in sort of that backup mode for redundancy, could it be used for, well, let me just finish, not only recreational, but also the Herring Committee is interested in looking into return of fish access from Whitman's Pond to Great Pond.
Yeah, and if there's the possibility that drinking water could come out of that pond, then that pond is a surface water supply. Whether it's classified as active, inactive, or emergency, it would have to stay a drinking water supply. If that's the redundancy route that the town pursues in the future of sort of a standby mode or whatever you want to call it. But, whether that would preclude, the herring run being restored all the way up to Great Pond, I guess that'd be a question for the regulatory folks. There are varying levels of use that surface water supplies have around. You think of like, what is it, Spot Pond in Cambridge, where people jog around it and walk their dogs. Great Pond right now is protected very thoroughly with wooded areas. So what Great Pond would look like down the road under these scenarios, I think would have to be worked out. But off the top of my head, I would say that restoring the herring run to Great Pond, I don't see why that would be out of the question.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Kathy Swain, 134 Mill Street. I have a couple questions. But first of all, this work is tremendous, and I applaud you for, Ryan, this has been on this for quite a while. This stuff is really good. The question and the fear we have is it's not going to happen like it's supposed to happen. And the first question that Allison asked was, it's not a town decision to stop taking water from a viable water source. It's a state decision. Is that correct?
The viability of a water source is really on the Department of Environmental Protection to decide.
Right. So for us to be told that we'll restore the herring run to Great Pond, you can't tell us that if we don't know it.
No, I agree.
Okay. So, and that was one of the reasons that was pushed to get MWRA. And we need MWRA. I'm not opposing that. But I just want to make sure that we're getting what we're told we're getting. A1 and A2, phase 1. What's the time frame on that's like 4 or 5 years, 7 years maybe, the max?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're hoping to have the water flowing, 2030 time
Right.
frame.
And Great Pond, what time frame would that be?
In what respect?
Actually running the route. Is A1 and A2 route the route that's going to allow us to stop taking out of Whitman's Pond right now? Or is it B1 and B2?
They both are.
They both are?
Yep. Doesn't matter which route. That's the proposed project.
Will blending ever stop? Will it always be blended, or will, if Great Pond gets to be decommissioned or just put in standby, will we just use MWRA water, or will it be still blending?
Yeah, if Great Pond is decommissioned in the future, yeah, then MWRA water would be the only source of water.
So we'd be able to get the pristine MWRA water that we've been hoping for. Unaccounted for water. Unaccounted for water is water that's been treated and supplied to the system and then unaccounted for. It's non-revenue producing. In 2022, approximately in Weymouth, 414 million gallons of water was considered non-revenue, or about 26% of our water supplied. Water loss is measured in two ways: apparent losses and real losses. Apparent losses are called paper losses because it's caused by inaccurate metering, and real losses are physical losses caused by leaks. The largest source of water loss in Weymouth comes from real losses, leaks. It is estimated over the course of 2023, Weymouth lost 90.5 gallons of water every minute. The revenue lost in 2022 caused by inaccurate metering was $68,000. The revenue lost in 2022 by real losses was $615,000. And it cost about, a cost per connection was about $40.73. If we go to MWRA, the cost could be as much as 3 times higher. As we were told, MWRA water is expensive water to waste. One of the requirements of MWRA is 2 conservation standards must be met. The first one is 65 gallons per capita, and the next is unaccounted water is at 10%. Right now, I think we're about 22 or 24. At the meeting at Tufts, I asked for a plan, if there was a plan for infrastructure improvement, or what I think the citizens would like to see, something in writing, something where we're going. And so far, we haven't seen a plan. The regulation clearly states these are separate conservation standards and are not, like if you're good in one, you can't waive the other. I think there was a feeling that since we only use 49 gallons per person, then we can not get to 10%. The water audit had many recommendations for the town of Weymouth system. Metering, environmental partners, which Ryan is involved with, recommends replacing old meters with new ultrasonic meters. These would help with leak detection and water theft. When all new meters are in, begin a water meter replacement program. It recommends the town replace all cast iron pipes of 12 inches or larger in a meter testing program. All these recommendations benefit us all, the residents, and we don't want to be paying for water we don't use. So MWRA is coming to us with many of us think it's a done deal, but how the program is implemented is not. Any project requires an evaluation of the benefits and the burdens. Justice comes when the benefits equal the burdens. We're asking the town to provide a plan of infrastructure improvement that we can see, and even when MWA arrives, to have that plan go past that so people don't have to pay, and we conserve water, and they're also asking them to look at this study that they paid for that was done and implement these new water meters so it's good for the people of the town, for all people in Union Point, for Weymouth, everywhere. It'll just cause conservation. It'll tell you when there's a leak happening sooner. So we ask that the town look at this. Thanks.
Thanks. Let me just say that we do make ongoing improvements to our system. Our application needs to address unaccounted for water. And so in order to address that, we have to present that plan to the state officials to show them how we're addressing that. So again, this is a long process that is not guaranteed to get an affirmative, at the end of it. So we have to go through that process and address those issues as part of the application.
Right.
And so that will all be in our application to
And
the
that will be
MWRA.
shared. We can find that on the MWRA site where you put all the other stuff.
Yeah, everything we're doing, that will all be something that's filed and have public comment, just like, this most recent, filing. So all
thank
that
you.
will be on there.
Hi, Linda Rubin, 18 Dorset Park Lane in South Weymouth. Can't hear
Just a
me?
little
Sorry.
closer, sorry. Thanks.
Sorry, Linda Rubin, 18 Dorset Park Lane. My question is about what if we don't do anything? What risk do we take? We can't expand because you can't expand in the town without water. If we can't expand, do we run the risk that Braintree had of a very large override that everybody has to pay for operational purposes so we can keep our fire, police, our teachers, and people that work in the town here? Is that something that we run the risk?
I mean, I think certainly the underlying goal of this effort is at some point in the future, Weymouth is going to run out of water. And we have an opportunity now, and we think a better opportunity than we're ever going to have in the future to fix that problem. Now, there could be several factors along the way that play into that water use. One of them is our new growth and redevelopment options that do provide us with more revenue than some of our surrounding towns, and we've done that over the last 8 years. We've averaged $2 million in new growth and we've been able to invest that back in the community in our budgets. But it's other factors that are unknown. My biggest red flag was the pandemic, and our water use went up 200,000 gallons a day overnight almost during the pandemic. So if we're also looking to the future of the unknown. But yeah, so I think there is risk at various levels involved if we don't address this issue. And I, again, think there's no better time to address it than now, even though it may be, several years in the future that we need this, solution.
Thank you.
Thank you for the wonderful presentation. Heidi Anderson, 2 Dorset Park Lane. I have a couple questions for you. I'll just combine them into one because I've been to a lot of the meetings. For people who have never been to any of these meetings, can you please explain how much the connection charge is and how much is being waived, as well as how many other towns on the South Shore have MWRA water? How many are trying to get it now?
So yeah, so the entry fee itself is going to save us close to $40 million. At this point, that's increased since we started this process. We have been meeting, like I said earlier, on the South Shore. There was a study done with the need on the South Shore, and more recently we've met with a few months ago, with at least 7, maybe 8 towns on the South Shore that have an interest in this project, because it could mean something they tap into, after the fact, with probably Hingham the most interested in right now. So there are a lot of other towns that are going to face and are facing this same concern with their water use and water demand and water supply and capacity, that they know they're going to be in the same situation. So they're watching us carefully and learning from us, and we're going to continue meeting with those folks so they can learn and not have to reinvent the wheel when it becomes their turn.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Allison Dossett again. I just want a clarification of something that was said earlier, and I want to make sure I have this correct or the way it's supposed to be to read. But if we were to choose a route that's more direct to the Great Pond treatment plant, the disinfectant would be changed to match MWRA. If that route is not selected, I want to get this correct. Did you say that the MWRA zones will be separated from the Weymouth zones to limit mixing? And does that suggest that there will be 2 separate types of water depending on where you may live?
Yeah, and it's more an issue of water not flowing uphill. So if we connect to the way Weymouth system works is water flows from south to north. There's 3 separate zones. And you can think of it as the height of the elevation of the tank sort of goes down as you head north. So if we connect to the intermediate zone, which is the central Weymouth, water will be able to flow to North Weymouth, but it can't flow up to South Weymouth. So you sort of have a natural border there. But the plan is we would build a pump station that if water needs to go to South Weymouth, we'd be able to pump it. But the amount of water that we would need to pump from the intermediate zone to the southern zone, the high service zone, is limited, and the amount of mixing is such that we wouldn't expect to see any aesthetic issues. But yeah, the water in that zone would be primarily from Great Pond, and then the intermediate zone and the low zone in North Weymouth would be MWRA.
And then you mentioned just now that there would have to be a treatment plant, and who pays for that? Are you referring to like the corrosion control strategy? Well, I'm just thinking if we don't know what the route is, if we do have this split where South Weymouth gets one path and North Weymouth gets the other, and you mentioned that there would be some kind of treatment plant to carry the water through the South Weymouth area, where would that be and who's paying?
Oh, that it wouldn't be a treatment plant. This would be a booster pump station, basically just to be able to fill the tanks in South Weymouth if necessary.
And how, on what kind of scale is that kind of an operation? Is there anything I could look at for comparison in another town?
Oh, I don't think the town of Weymouth has a comparable pump station. I think off the top of my head, we're talking a pretty small pump station just to supplement what Great Pond could provide South Weymouth. So it wouldn't be anything like the Great Pond water treatment plant. It would be a 20 by 20 building or something to that sort of relative scale.
I guess I'm still asking who pays.
It's all part of the project. I mean, in the scale of the pipeline, that's $90 to $100 million or $150 million. It's a drop in the bucket at a pump station like that.
It's funny you use those figures because it was 80 when we started a couple of years ago, and then it shot up to 110. So I guess we'll wait and see. But thank you.
Yeah, either way, it's a small cost.
Yeah, I think from the beginning, the range was 80 to 120.
Hi.
Just before, sorry, I'm just going to let people on, because we still have 30 people on Zoom. If there's anyone on Zoom that wants to ask a question or make a comment, just go to reactions, hit the raise hand, and then I'll send you an invite to unmute, and then you can ask your question. Go ahead, sir. Go ahead, you can go. Go ahead.
Okay.
Yep, thanks.
My name is Larry Cole. I live on Stonehaven Drive in Union Point. My question is, when the demand projections for the future were made, was MBTA Communities Act compliance taken into account? And the town has a plan in the works. Do we have any estimate yet of the number of units that potentially would be permitted, and then an estimate of the actual number that might be built? And where would they be if not in Union Point? What other parts of town would have high-density buildings coming to them that they don't have now?
Thanks. So we've had zoning changes beginning of the Headland administration to allow for redevelopment along our corridors, our village centers. We have approximately, if I'm just going on memory here, about 1,100 units left to build on the town side. The project at Union Point's up to 6,000 units. So those are the ones in the pipeline, if you will, that will need, obviously, water to make happen.
I would say we also, outside of what's sort of on the books, we took those targeted zones for redevelopment and came up with estimated water demands based on floor area ratios, height of a building, how many residential units would go in here in a redevelopment scenario. So we sort of took the recent redevelopment projects and said, let's take that as an example and put that everywhere that's targeted for growth, and where does the water demand go? So we sort of took what's on the books, what could come along, that's the total number we came up with.
Thanks. Go ahead.
My name is Mary Parsons. I live at 754 Union Street in Rockland, and I am one of the communities that's involved in the MEPA process for the South Weymouth Naval Air Station in terms of water. I have a couple of quick questions. Is this a direct pipeline from the MWRA? And if not, is water going to be wheeled, and will there be an extra price attached to that wheeling?
The plan is a direct pipeline does not connect through any of the neighboring communities. There's no wheeling proposed at all.
So there's a direct pipeline coming through Quincy?
Yeah.
Coming from Blue Hills, it could, yeah.
Yep.
Quincy.
Quincy and/or Braintree. Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Hello, good evening. Tricia Prize, 15 Woodbine Road. My question is related to development. And first off, I am really happy we're having this conversation about the MWRA coming into the Great Pond Treatment Plant. When I took a tour of that, I'm going to say 15 years ago, there were 2 inputs to that plant. And the goal was to have one of those inputs be an MWRA input for the base. And I'm very happy we're having this conversation right now. I'm also happy to hear the dedication to the Herring Run and Whitman's Pond and Old Swamp River. My concern is the balance between the development and the unintended consequences of development that, one, is going to create more impervious pavements and have a negative impact on the recharge rate of the watershed for the Herring Run, because it will no longer be classified as a water source. And 2, there are hard infrastructure limits in the town of Weymouth. There are roads that are only 2 lanes long. So when you talk about you want additional water for development, I'm very curious to understand where that's going to be. And if that increased development, more housing along major corridors, that impacts the quality of life every day. A 10-minute trip is now 25, 30 minutes. So when we talk about how much water we can take from the MWRA, my question is, what are we using it for? Because all the comment, 1, we're wasting 26% of our water right out of the gate, which is, you know, a little concerning. 2, we're getting more expensive water through aging infrastructure. So that 26% might increase, because if they're deteriorating at a rate greater than we're repairing them, now we're going to be wasting more expensive water. So I'm most interested to see how the MWRA is going to be connected to that second input pipe through a path that doesn't require pumping stations, because we talked about this already, the elevations between North and South Weymouth. And there was a preferred path in the final environmental impact report. And it seems that this meeting is picking up their preferred water source for the base. And I hope the phase 1 is to get that water into that treatment plant to support the base. So we don't have to play this little, let's get a little bit of revenue by building houses here and a little bit of revenue by building houses here, thinking that one child doesn't impact our budget at all in any of these places. And very quickly, we are losing our infrastructure capacity to bring business in. We're going to rip up Main Street that was just considered a road improvement to support the base. Sure, that's because the water should have been there before you repave that road, and it's not there. So as you look for support for this plan, I just ask for a timeline and some degree of actually moving forward on plans, because the final environmental impact report did state the MWRA. And I believe Madden was involved in that water treatment plant to get those dual inputs. One can argue that was good vision and foresight. So how come that's not in place right now? And instead of talking about running through all towns and a whole bunch of wetlands, there is a path that was already defined. And I'm going to say approved because it was in the environmental impact report. So I hope phase 1 is that. And you talk about the desal plant over in Brockton. You know, there's an output, there's a place for any additional water we need. And finally, you keep referring to the safe yield as 6.5 million, and you treat that number as if that's what we can pump. That is not the allowable yield. So all along, you're misstating a number, and right out of the gate, your definitions are off, and I don't know about anyone else, but that just makes me more curious about any number you present. Thank you.
Alice Arena, Blueberry Street in Weymouth. So I just have a couple questions because I'm a little confused on the pipelines coming through Quincy and Braintree. I believe that the A1 already exists because Calpine, I believe, takes their water from Quincy. So that hookup is already there. But I'm questioning A2 and B1. Do those pipelines exist, or is that something that's going to have to be created?
Yeah, none of those pipelines exist right now. They're all, those are the options for this proposed infrastructure.
Okay. I spoke with Rebecca Weidman, who is the Deputy Chief Operating Officer of the MWRA.
Yep.
I believe that's a new title. It's got to be 2 years ago now. And I asked her directly about the Braintree line, and she said it was off the table. She said it was not something that they were even willing to talk about. And I'm trying to get information from the Braintree Town Council as well to see that this is something that's an actual reality. Because one of the things that my group has talked about is that really the only hookup you have available to you is the A1, and that comes with its own set of complications. So I'm asking what kind of conversations you've been having with Braintree, because I'm hearing something completely different from Braintree.
Recently, because no, we met with the mayor, had very 2-hour meeting, I believe, very constructive meetings, and now those conversations are at the staff level going over the details of the routes and the impacts for each of those routes. So those conversations are ongoing, so I'm not sure who took it off or the table you're referring to, but it is.
That was the MWRA.
It is clearly on our table, and the MWRA is well aware of that being one of the options, because they had a part in, those options that we had.
Yeah, I know it was discussed before, and so that brings me to the next question, is that Braintree has their own water supply. They just put a lot of money into having to get a new treatment facility because of the PFAS problems there. And so what I've understood from Braintree is they have no interest in hooking up to MWRA. So does that mean MWRA is going to wheel water through Braintree? Because that's not something they do.
No, it's a direct pipeline from the MWRA, where they end in Blue Hills,
Right.
through Braintree to Weymouth. It's not going to be to Weymouth and then Weymouth to Braintree. It's going to be.
No, I know that, but.
So that would be wheeling. This is coming directly from the MWRA in Blue Hills to Weymouth.
Okay, so that goes back to an old conversation I had at least 15 years ago, maybe longer now, that Braintree would have to accept MWRA water if that pipeline was to go through. Is that not correct? That's what I was told.
No.
I've
We just have to have that intermunicipal agreement with them for the pipe to come through their community.
Okay.
That has to be part of the application, but they don't have to join MWRA.
MWRA.
Yeah.
Okay, all right,
Thanks.
thank you.
Hi, my name's Frank Singleton. I'm on the Weymouth Conservation Commission, but I've lived here a long time and so forth. I just want to raise one issue that is not always seems to be glossed over. Besides water, there's also sewage. Our system is surcharged, and the MWRA or all that is not going to solve that problem for us. So I just wanted to dial in when we start looking at the impact of development and increased development, or even what's going on now. We've got to dial in what are we doing with the utility systems other than water that are basically stressed right now and are starting to get. And there's also financial issues about the recent raise in our prices for how we pay for water, how we pay for sewage, how we pay for refuse. I'd like to point out that the whole problem more and more is getting with the sewage issue, I think critical to development as well. So is that something later on is going to be dialed in to look at what are we going to do to solve the problem of development if we're leaving a big component of it on the table while just talking about water?
No, you're 100% correct. And sewer impacts as regard to this project have been something we've been looking at. And even without this project, we have sewer issues. So we have several ongoing sewer projects right now in Weymouth. We're addressing the Wharf Street Pump Station. We're doing the LCI project over by Idlewell at $8 million alone. So we're doing these projects now knowing the capacity issues that we're going to need to face with the increased uses. So a lot of those projects to help with that demand are being done now, looking ahead to when the water starts flowing. Yep, but we're addressing, we're addressing the need. We know there's a choke point with sewer, and so we're working on, again, several projects to try to address that now. knowing that that's going to be needed down the road. And then we're not done there. We're, part of this, the mitigation and stuff will be, new revenue to continue those upgrades. And again, hopefully sooner, knowing that that is a problem now, not just 6 years from now. I don't have anyone on Zoom that has raised their hand, but I do have a couple questions in chat that I will just read to you, Ryan. The first one is, what is the preferred redundancy option, and what is the future plan to make it happen as it stands now?
I'm not sure there's a preferred redundancy option at this point. I think, you have to look at this project as such a long horizon. We're in the beginning of the permitting process now, and, we're hoping to have water flowing in 7 years, 8 years. So the landscape of what makes sense redundancy-wise could be different than what it is now. I think ideally from an environmental perspective, there's, the MWRA expands and they provide a redundant pipeline from a different direction. Those sort of solutions could present themselves over the long horizon of this project, but I don't, at least in my mind, have a preferred redundancy option at this point.
And the second, which was actually 3 questions, so I'll just, the first one, is this a deep tunnel boring pipeline or cut and cover?
In the roadways, it'll most likely be a cut and cover, like you would see most pipeline installations. For major crossings, like the Fore River, if that becomes the route, we would certainly cover it in a trenchless way, and it would either be, it could be directional drill or a tunnel boring machine, and those details, need to be worked out with in the design process with, geotechnical exploration, and there's a lot of work to be done in order to determine exactly how you get a pipe underneath the Fore River.
Could you just elaborate on how those differ, just for the layman?
Yeah, so a horizontal directional drill is, that's a great question, Ted. I'm trying to think how you just...
We have other engineers here if you need.
When you see a horizontal directional drill it's like a vertical drill that you would drill to, say, drill a well in your backyard, but it's at an angle, and they have control over the angle of the drilling head. So they can send it in at an angle, and they know exactly how deep it is and where it is horizontally, and they can direct it, so if they know the river it's 40 feet to the riverbed, they'll know that, okay, we're 60 feet below that, and we know what the soil is like at that depth, so we know exactly where we're supposed to be. So it's more like a regular drilling rig at an angle, and then, like I said, you can sort of steer it. A tunnel boring machine is typically used for larger diameter pipes. That'd be like what they used for the big dig to put a road underneath, put the tunnel underneath Boston, but at a much smaller scale. So you would build a shaft that's, say, 8 or 9 feet in diameter. You would lower the tunnel boring machine in and send it in the direction. There's steering as well for that, but the biggest difference is you need large access shafts along the pipeline route for a tunnel boring machine. So, and the advantages and disadvantages of those two methods will really be played out when we do borings along the path that we want to drill to see what, from a geotechnical perspective, what makes sense. Is it rock? Is it clay? Is it silty sand? Those sort of things we have to all take into consideration. So hopefully that answers the question.
The next question is, which route is the preferred alternative, North Weymouth, East Braintree, or South Braintree?
I think we've stated plenty of times that the hydraulically favorable route is to South Weymouth, just because it allows the system to operate as it does now, sort of flowing by gravity from south to north. But I think in the end, there are so many factors to be considered that we're working through now, working through all the alternatives, and we have to consider what's important not just to Weymouth, but what's important to Braintree and Quincy, because they're the ones who are going to be feeling the brunt of the construction impacts. So, I think in the end, we're going to have alternatives that are scored based on which criteria, the criteria being environmental impacts, traffic, environmental justice impacts. Now, these are all things we have to take into consideration and sort of, add everything up at the end and score the pipelines and see which one overall makes the most sense.
And the third part here is, does Braintree currently have pipes for emergency MWRA hookup?
I don't think they have I'm not an expert on the Braintree system. I don't think they have a direct connection to the MWRA. So I think that would be something that they would gain if the pipeline was to go through Braintree, was they would have an emergency supply from the MWRA, which they don't currently have, I don't believe.
Can you just come to the mic? Sorry. Thanks. Thank you.
Braintree, I spoke with Braintree, and they said that they had an emergency connection. I don't know if that's a main pipe, but they do have the ability. One of the people who was on town council, who was also involved with MWRA, said that they had an emergency connection. But I don't know if that's what they said. I don't know if it's true.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, like I said, I don't know the details of how that works in their water system.
Another question popped up, although I think it's more one for the MWRA. I keep hearing that the MWRA pump station is at capacity. Weymouth is fixing their sewage. What about the sewage from MWRA already going into the Fore River? Actually, we would have that.
Yeah, I mean, what I would say to that is the MWRA is going to review this submittal like every other regulatory agency, and they're going to make their make their feelings heard loud and clear about water side and sewer side. So, questions like that when the public comment period is over, and the secretary issues a certificate with all the comments, that sort of question will certainly be answered.
Great.
From their, from their perspective, which is obviously the most important.
All right. Appreciate that. For folks that didn't get copies, there are copies, I see them out in the hallway, more copies of the presentation. The presentation will also be on the town website. If you just search MWRA, there's a web page on our town website dedicated with all of our presentations, and we'll have a link to this meeting as well when it's uploaded. And I just want to thank everyone for coming. Have a good night. Take care.